Hello everyone, Richard here at Kelvin Wazoo with another video for you. And today I got a bunch of records. I've had some new acquisitions over the last month or so, a lot of new records. And so I've decided to sort of, categorize them in terms of maybe era or genre and things like that. I know that I did one semi recently about country and folk records. This one is mostly 70s music. And when we're growing up, roughly from the time we're about, I'm going to say 14 to about 17, 18, and the music that was going on at that time tends to be the primary influence, I think, in forming our basic musical tastes. And so, yeah, I was in that when I was at that age, we're talking early to mid. And, by the time I was in college, going to college, it would have been late 70s. So overall, the 1970s were very influential in forming my musical palette, although I really do love all types of music from all types of eras. So some of these records, I remember listening and hearing them on, listening with other people who had copies and also on the radio. And so I'm bringing them into my collection. I'm not going to play any samples because the number of records, it would just make this video too long, and just me talking can make the video go kind of long, right? So just going to talk a little bit about each of these in this group. And the first one is 10 Years After, A Space in Time. All right, which on the Columbia label. So yeah, this was a 1971 album. I would have been roughly 13 years old at that time. So I wasn't listening to 10 Years After at that time in my life. It would have been in high school, so we're talking mid 70s, a little later. And this album is now the second 10 years after I got in my collection. And so A Space and Time is representative of more of perhaps some would call their more psychedelic era. I also really love Alvin Lee's just rock and blues guitar playing. There is a live 10 Years After album, which doesn't get a lot of respect, I think. It's a double album, with the cover that shows the recording console. I can't remember what it's called at the moment, but I do really like that live album. And of course he had a famous performance during Woodstock. But this is a really solid album for them. Some people call it their best album. Because of the preference for the more psychedelic 10 Years After. And the one song people still kind of talk about now is I Want to Change the World, or If I Could Change the World, or what the heck? I'd love to change the world, yeah. A lot of interesting takes on this song, and some people talk about whether that song's lyric content has aged well in the age of what people like to euphemize as political correctness, which I find to be a derogatory term for just being a decent human being. But anyway, it's that song, I'd Love to Change the World, because it opens up with the lines, everywhere is freaks and Harrys, dykes and ferries. Tell me, where is sanity? So you've got Alvin Lee, he's certainly in the camp of the freaks and Harrys, right? So is he singing, or is the voice of the song being pointedly critical of, freaks and hippies and gays, being more open and open in society? Well, then you get the next line: tax the rich, feed the poor, till there are no rich no more. So some people have said that first stanza, he's not really dishing on, hippies and gay people. But he is, they say, there are many people by contrast, in the next stanza, he is criticizing the notion of taxing the rich to feed the poor, because eventually you won't have any rich anymore. Which seems to me a bit out of line with the first verse. I kind of think the two verses work together from a single voice, which is not necessarily Alvin Lee's point of view. I mean, it might be. There are a lot of people, especially some rock stars, when they suddenly get famous and start making a lot of money, they start becoming concerned about taxes, and they become more anti-tax, even though their core political beliefs may be more on the liberal side. But it's funny how when you start making a lot of money, that your notion of what is fair changes and becomes much more self-absorbed. But in reality, I just think those opening verses are representing a voice of, the older generation at that time, looking at what is happening in the world and kind of shaking its collective head. And then the idea of tax the rich, that's the simplistic response of the older generation to this notion. Well, if you do that, then there won't be any more rich people, which is not true. Then we get the chorus: I'd love to change the world, but I don't know what to do, so I'll leave it up to you. Very spacey, very cool, psychedelic chorus in there. And also very nihilistic in some respects. So, because, on the side here, there is kind of this notion, which I kind of like about the song, is, okay, you've got these people who are controlling the world, and you may have a desire to change the world for the better, but in the long score of everything, your desire to change the world to fit your view is no different than the greedy capitalists who are trying to control the world and keep it working to their benefit. So it's a tricky line, and I that's what I like, about the song. And then when we get into the next verses, then I think we start to get more of Alvin Lee's perspective on the whole situation. When he's saying life is funny, skies are sunny, bees make honey. Who needs money? No, not poor me. So it kind of comes into, he's playing around with this notion that, maybe, in the rest of the song, maybe if we just concentrated more on being happy and living a life that brings us happy without trying to walk over other people, that would be, a pretty good way to live. The one pointed thing that he comes out toward the end of the song is, because this was during the Vietnam War, he says, stop the war. Because that was everywhere, worldwide, America's involvement in Vietnam was viewed with great disdain. So anyway, this is a classic album, really, really good album. I don't think the lyrics are necessarily problematic. They represent the era of the time. To probably say that in a song now, you would be called on it properly, I think, because there are ways you can still express that notion without it sounding derogatory. But again, I don't think it does sound derogatory. I mean, even among the Deadheads, you had Fairyland, which was the gay Deadheads. And they had their old, their whole thing, and they embraced the concept that they were fairies, because of the whole psychedelic thing, so, it takes a little more, things are, the universe might operate on a binary system, but human interaction does not, nor does the flow of knowledge. Another one this was big, I remember, at the time of my, I think about close to the time of my graduation. So is this album by Stewart Year of the Cat. I remember, the title song, Year of the Cat, was on the radio all the time. Got it here on the, this is on the Janus Records label. So I was very, very, very familiar with the song Year of the Cat, but I didn't know a lot about the rest of the album. I didn't buy it at that time. So it's finally in my collection now, and it is a really, really solid album. I didn't know that Alan Parsons was the sound engineer and producer for this. It's just a really great, great album in the way it was put together. 1976, the year I graduated. Yeah, it was produced by Alan Parsons. I'd have to look more closely to see if he was doing the engineering as well. My suspicion is he probably definitely had a hand in the engineering. But what the heck? I got a second here. Let me take a look and see what in the credits. Produced by Alan Parsons. Okay, so yeah, I'm guess he had his hand in everything, including the engineering. Or at least I don't see any credits for any sound engineers on this. Yeah, so it's an interesting, what's kind of cool about the album is when you listen to it, the songs in some respects seem to have a musical connection, but it's not really a concept album. The songs are kind of, they're a little bit all over the place, even though there is as I say, sort of a sound connection that pulls them all together. But yeah, excellent album. Now this one was also one that came out about, I remember hearing it on the radio, FM radio, when radio, they would play, entire sides of albums, so that they could, they drop the needle on the record, and then the DJ would step out, smoke a joint or a cigarette or whatever. And this one got quite a bit of radio play from a radio station. I was living in a rural area, so my lifeline to new music was this radio station that was in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I think it was WLAV FM. And they would play, the King Biscuit Flower Hour and a lot of concerts, late at night. And then, of course, because there were no corporate playlists yet, this was just before the corporatization of FM radio, which made FM radio suck, in my opinion. So you would hear all kinds of new music that, a particular DJ, had heard about or liked, and then they would play it, during their show, because these shows weren't, some of them were, like King Biscuit Flower Hour, and a lot of them were put together ahead of time, and then, played all the way through. Those were special syndicated shows. but the ones that the individual DJs at the stations were doing, they brought in their records, or they, had the records in the studio, and then they just played what they wanted. So Todd Rundgren's Utopia was the debut for Todd Rundgren and Utopia. And they played this a lot. And I just remember hearing it, listening in my headphones. And I had a positive memory of the album from what I heard on the radio. But again, it was an album I didn't buy at the time. So it's now in my collection. And when I listened to it, I was like, wow, talk about pretentious, progressive music. I mean, it is just like grandiose to the extreme. I mean, it is, it's good. It's good. Not as good as I remember when I was listening to it as a teenager, but it's still good. The other crazy thing about this is that this album is like nearly an hour in length. So that was a huge engineering conquest or achievement to get something like that on a record, because side 2, which has the song The Icon, and that's it, just The Icon, it's a 30-minute side. And then side 1, you've got Utopia, which is 14 minutes, and you've got a 10-minute song, Freak Parade, after that. So we're at 24 minutes with 2 songs, and there's 3 songs on this. Freedom Fighters, so that's 28 minutes. So and we're talking rock music, so even with that, the grooves are going to be like really narrow, and that's what they had to do with this, is they had to really compress the sound in order to get it all on a single LP. Now, I don't have a CD, but my understanding that the CDs that were released at the time didn't have to worry about that kind of compression. So, I may pick up a CD and give it a listen to see if there's any sonic difference, if it sounds better without, the compression. But yeah, it's in my collection now, something from high school. It's, like I say, talk about grandiose, and really over the top. But yeah, it's good. It's good. I'll listen to it more than a few times. Now, another one from that era, this was released in the 80s, but we're talking about somebody who goes back into the 60s. And if you remember or have heard of a band called the 13th Floor Elevators, and then you have Rocky Erickson, who was the frontman for the group, guitar player, had a lot of personal issues in terms of his mental health, and also in that combination, he was already dealing with potential psychiatric issues that were made much worse by his indulgence in psychedelic drugs. So Rocky Erickson continued, though, to make some really amazing music after the 13th Floor Elevators. And the one I found is Don't Slander Me. Now, you'll see that what I have is just the LP, okay? Yeah, I got just the LP, nothing else. In like, I would say VG Plus, maybe even near mint condition. Got it for $8. Now, this is an album that it'll fetch close to $100 if you can get it with a cover. So, the fact that I found it in such great condition, and even $8 is pretty expensive for a record that doesn't have a cover. But nonetheless, I picked it up, and we've got some really great tunes in there, some classic Rocky Erickson, and, so I'm glad I, picked that up. 13th Floor Elevators and Rocky Erickson, that was something that I was unaware of when I was growing up in Michigan. You know, there was just so much music, but I grew up in a primarily very rural area, so I didn't have a lot of access to record stores or record stores that had huge inventories. That really didn't happen until the 80s when I moved to Tucson and was living out west. Some other records that I picked up. I've been really keen on finding early Crazy Horse records. Crazy Horse, you know, the band that plays from time to time with Neil Young. And I saw this one available. It's Crazy Moon. And this is Crazy Horse when San Pedro joins them. All right, so we're talking Crazy Horse. And here's the, you know, it's got the lyric sheet. And Neil Young plays on this. This was completely produced outside of the normal production people that Neil Young was using at the time. But at this time, you've got Ralph Molina on drums and Billy Talbot on bass, but we got Frank San Pedro, shoot, now that his nickname is like, I'm forgetting. Frank San Pedro, Pancho. That's it. He's come in, you know, to replace. And now I'm forgetting his name too. And my Neil Young is right up here. Right. So when they were the Rockets, and so we're talking about Danny Whitten. Tough remembering some of these things. So, you know, they were the Rockets before, and then they became Crazy Horse with Neil Young, and they did some records on their own as Crazy Horse. But as I say, Neil Young plays on some of these songs. It's a really good album that I happen to find in one of the record stores I go to from time to time. So got that added in there, and then at the same time, I felt very fortunate to see in the pile this original Neil Young Tonight's the Night with the sort of blotter paper cover. So this is a studio. I have the live recording, which was released later when they would like go over to this bar near where I can't remember, was it the Whiskey A Go-Go or some other place that they would go to after they would be done recording, and they would play the same music live on the black label Reprise. Didn't pay a whole lot for this. I mean, it was less than $15, I think, even though it's an early pressing. But you see a former owner, Eileen, wrote her name on it. That's gonna, like, you know, ding it a bit, but nonetheless, really, really good. This, you know, a very transformative album for Crazy Horse, for Neil Young, for Nils Lofgren, who was playing with them, because this was after Danny Whitten had died from an overdose, and also a member of the road team, who his name escapes me, Bobby, I think his name was, who also OD'd at that time. So it was a very cathartic album and just a really great album in general. Now, the last two records I got here, you know, in my early college years, you know, freshman and sophomore year, a lot of people were playing a lot of Steve Miller, and the Fly Like an Eagle album, I believe, had come out at that time, around 1976, 77, somewhere around there. So I heard a lot of that, and I liked, Steve Miller, but I didn't like him enough based on that record to want to buy the record. But I did enjoy listening to it. And then I started hearing people talk about Steve Miller's early stuff and that it was much, much better, more psychedelic, I guess you could say. And so I found these records. This one here, number 5, the Steve Miller Band, on this green Capitol label, which I believe is, yes, this is a Canadian pressing. And man, really, really good. I really do like this. And it's one of, I guess, rated one of his better releases. And then, of course, I also picked up the anthology, The Best of Steve Miller, which has many songs that are from number 5. It does have some of the other ones that were kind of semi-hits. It's got Space Cowboy, Living in the USA, or other songs on there just before we started getting the stuff that he was doing that eventually showed up on Fly Like an Eagle, which, is, like I say, is good. I don't dislike it, and I'll probably pick it up, now that I've got the early stuff. But this anthology was 1972. And then number 5, I probably should have looked at when did that come out? I don't see a date on the label. This Canadian, there's just, I'm not finding anything. There's like no date. Come on, there must be some date here, someplace, for when this came out. I am kind of surprised. Wow, yeah. I guess I would have needed to have looked this up on either Discogs or the All Music Guide, because no matter where I'm looking inside the cover, I'm not finding a copyright date on it. Anyway, good stuff. I am glad that I picked up the early Steve Miller. I do like that material, much, much better than Fly Like an Eagle, which, as I say, I don't dislike Fly Like an Eagle. I just never felt motivated to pay money for it. So yeah, those are my 70s era pickups for over the last month and a half. Hope you like that. Hey, please leave a comment in the Down Under. Maybe talk about some of the albums that really solidified what you enjoy, what type of music you enjoyed because of that era that I'm talking about, roughly about from when you're like 13 to about 17 years old, just before you may head off to college. That's going to be another era that's going to influence, your music. But what really gets you started, that's, is when you're in junior high and high school, I think. And that really kind of forms our musical worldview from which we expand in other directions in various ways. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope I didn't blather too much. But hey, I like having you guys out there, everyone out there, all you people out there. And please remember to pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.